Hi, I'm Bob, and this is Costa Doing Business, where faith, finance, family, and freedom intersect. We're going to take a break from our uh, continuing series on real estate, and I want to talk to you tonight for a short while on, is it a big, beautiful bill, or is it a crazy abomination? So, President Trump describes it as a big, beautiful bill. But Elon Musk tweeted recently that it was a disgusting abomination. He said, I can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those of you who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. Just a few days ago, these two men showed little daylight between them, and then the Doge father broke from the government, and all of a sudden, his tweets got very pointed. Elon seems to be concerned with government overspending and hoped that a Republican House and a Republican Senate would take the mission of Doge seriously and codify the cuts into one big, beautiful bill. But when they refused to make the deep cuts that he was recommending to government spending, Musk sounded the alarm about basically debt being slavery, which, by the way, is a biblical principle found in the book of Proverbs when the writer, who happened to be Solomon, said that the borrower is servant or slave to the lender. So I don't disagree with him there. And Revelation 6, 5 through 6 says this: When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, Come. And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of four living creatures saying, A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. And this represents a national economy. And of course, this is an end time prophecy. And it describes a people that will be clamoring for an economy that is untouched by restraint or prudent spending. It says, do not hurt the oil or the wine. And it seems like we're in this period where people really don't want to cut anything. And I wish that this fight were a little bit more private. I mean, it's never wise to engage in a public debate with a guy who owns the largest social media platform in the country. He has a bit of a large soapbox. But Elon Musk's basic point is this: we are overspending, not in millions, not even in billions, but in the trillions of dollars. Now, most people can't even fathom $1 trillion. Elon's point seems to be that in 2010, our national debt was 13.5 trillion. By 2020, the national debt was 27.7 trillion, so it over doubled in just 10 years. At the end of 2023, it was 34 trillion, and today it's over 38 trillion, very soon to be 40 trillion. At some point soon, it's going to be almost impossible to pay it all off, which means that a default on our national debt seems likely without radical intervention. But remember that the clamor of the people in end days is going to be, do not touch the oil or the wine. The implications of the United States defaulting on its debt right now, which is considered the safest in the world. The problem is if we default, it will be a global signal that our economy is in trouble and our dollar is weak. Nations who trade in dollars particularly keep in mind that historically all petroleum sales were in the US dollar. That's why we call it the petrodollar. But if nations who trade in dollars start dumping dollars and moving into other currencies, which is exactly what the BRICS nations are trying to do, it's going to devalue the purchasing power of our dollar. And when the buying power of our dollar drops, we call this devaluation. Devaluation leads to inflation. Now, the reason inflation was so high recently, just in 2023, is largely because of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was probably the greatest misnomer of any piece of legislation out there. But when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, the national debt rose to 122% of GDP. That means that the debt is now bigger than the gross domestic product in 1 year. This weakened the dollar considerably, and inflation rose quickly. Now, to be fair, there were other factors like supply chain problems, student loan forgiveness, and of course, we were just coming off the heels of COVID. But the reality is that this massive spending bill was the real reason for inflation. So think of Americans today who are already struggling, how expensive things are. And what if your dollar lost 20 or even 50% of its purchasing power? If the value of a dollar goes down by 50%, it's essentially the same as everything doubling in price. Now, I know it wouldn't be exactly a double in price on every category of goods. Some might be more, some might be less. But on average, essentially, when the dollar goes down in purchasing power, the corresponding price of everything goes up. So Doge hoped to find $1 to $2 trillion in savings to get our annual budget back to just pre-COVID levels. Think about this for a minute. Elon Musk was saying all the COVID spending we did should now be unnecessary. So let's just get the government back to pre-COVID levels by cutting $1 to $2 trillion in spending. And you would have thought that he was committing mass murder with the way that some politicians and even some of the public reacted. Think about this. They found roughly 176 billion in cuts. 176 billion, not even close to a trillion thus far. And some people have nearly lost their minds over just those cuts. Now, to put it in perspective, let's compare a million, a billion, and a trillion, and let's convert it into spending. If you spent $10 per minute, that would equal $600 per hour, which, if you didn't sleep and you spent for 24 hours straight, in one day, you would spend $14,400. If you could do that every day nonstop until you had spent just $1 million, you would run through $1 million in just about 69.4 days, which is a little over 2 months. That's $1 million. Now, spending at the same rate, $10 per minute, which means 14,400 a day, it would take you 69,444 days to burn through $1 billion. That's roughly 190 years. So you could not spend $10 a minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in your lifetime and reach $1 billion. Now let's look at a trillion. If you spent just $10 per minute, equaling 14,400 per day, it would take you 69,444,444 days to spend $1 trillion. That's over 190,000 years. As I indicated, our debt is not 1 trillion. I wish it were. Our debt is over 38 trillion and counting. If you go online and look at the national debt clock, the numbers are moving so fast that it's astonishing. To put this another way, I saw an interesting post on X about what 1 trillion means. Let's put it in terms of time. 1 million seconds ago from today is May 23rd. If we went back 1 billion seconds ago, it would be the year 1993. That's 32 years. If we went back 1 trillion seconds ago, it would be 30,000 BC, before Christ. That's just 1 trillion. And I remind you, our nation is in debt by over 38 trillion and counting. If that's not enough, let's look at another slide and try to put it in another perspective. 1 million is 6 zeros. If it was seconds in a day, again, that's 12 days ago. 1 billion is 9 zeros. Seconds, that's 32 years ago. 1 trillion is 12 zeros. And as I indicated from the post on X, it's not original to me. That would take you back to 30,000 BC. So this is the reason, or one of the reasons at least, that Elon Musk and several Republican politicians are very concerned, is this really doesn't address this big, beautiful bill, which Elon Musk calls a crazy abomination, does not address the very obvious problem of our national debt. Now, Stephen Miller, representing the president, says about the big, beautiful bill that the bill was not really intended to cut the debt. Apparently, they have some other plans for that in the future, hopefully. He indicated that this bill focuses on the fact that, number one, this is the most significant border security bill in the history of the United States, and it is also a deportation bill, and the most significant one in U.S. history. So according to Steve Miller, this is just the president keeping campaign promises in his first big, beautiful bill. So he is keeping the promise to seal the border, send a lot of illegals. I know that term is not politically correct in some circles, but I'm a little tired right now, and so I'm going to use it to send some illegal aliens, which is what the law calls them, back to their home countries or their country of origin. And according to Mr. Miller, he argues that the big, beautiful bill is actually not a budget bill, it's a national security bill. It also reforms spending on welfare, that is the greatest welfare reconstruction since Bill Clinton tackled the problem back in the 1990s. And it is a welfare reform bill in the sense that it strengthens work requirements on able-bodied people. It removes illegal aliens from many welfare programs and forces, again, able bodied people to get off the public dole and not have their lifestyle supported by your taxes. Well, it's sounding a little bit better already, which brings us to the biggest point of the bill, and that is taxes. The bill keeps the current tax rates. Now, there's been a lot of information, and that's why I'm doing this podcast. The bill keeps the current tax rates and the standard deduction and some depreciation deductions that are currently in place. The bill keeps them in place. Because if this bill is not passed in its present form, with maybe only minor modification, taxes will go back to pre-2017 levels. In 2017, President Trump, in his first term, passed the most sweeping tax cuts in the history of our nation. If we go back to pre-2017 levels, it is going to amount to just the opposite, the biggest tax increase in U.S. history. For families making $50,000 or less, you've heard it's only on the rich. That's not true. For families making $50,000 or so, it increases their taxes between $2,000 and $2,500 a year. That's 4 to 5% of their income on top of what they're already paying. And when you combine that with recent price increases due to inflation, this could be disastrous. Plus, it eliminates taxes on tips and reduces taxes on Social Security below certain income levels. President Trump promised that he was going to make Social Security non-taxable. But somehow in this bill, it doesn't quite do that. What it does, it says if you are below a certain income level, that your Social Security will not be taxed. Right now, if you have any other form of income really below or above a fairly modest level, this comes as a shock to many retirees. Your Social Security is 85% taxable. So as long as you are below a certain income level, this bill eliminates taxes on Social Security. Now, here comes the CBO. And if you don't know what the CBO is, it is the Congressional Budget Office. Now, the Congressional Budget Office was created by Congress years ago to score congressional budget bills. And what we mean by scoring is they'll say it adds this much to the deficit, it takes this much away from the deficit, which is quite frankly almost never the case. The CBO has come and it has said that this bill is going to add $2 trillion to the deficit. And this is why Senator Rand Paul and some of the conservative Republican budget hawks in the House have really spoken out against this bill, even though it is primarily a Republican bill. They say it's going to add to the deficit. But the interesting thing is, so is it possible that the CBO is right? What's interesting is presidents on both sides have complained endlessly about the CBO because basically the CBO tells everybody how expensive what they want to do as far as a policy decision goes, how expensive that is and what it will cost. But in this case, is it really going to raise the budget deficit by $2 trillion? What exactly is the CBO talking about? What the CBO is basically assuming is that the Trump tax cuts, which are set to expire this year, what they're saying is if they expire, it is going to create a tax increase of $2 billion or trillion dollars that is going to bring that much more into the United States Treasury. So the CBO is basically saying we're not going to be getting the tax money as a result of people's taxes not going up, and therefore the deficit is going to go up. The problem as Musk sees it, and as I see it as well, is the real problem with government is not that you and I are paying too little in taxes. The problem is that our government is spending too much. And Musk wants the bill to seriously cut spending to offset the tax cuts, which again are actually just keeping our current system in place plus a few tweaks. But the bill doesn't do that significantly. The other problem is that the Democrats are not going to help pass this bill, so the Republicans have to pass it, if possible, by themselves. And the margins in the Republican conference or the margins of Republican control are very small. So there is a House of Representative named Thomas Massey. He voted against the big, beautiful bill, which passed the House only by one vote. And Rand Paul is the senator that is most arduously arguing against the bill and the most ardent budget cutter. He does not want to vote for the big, beautiful bill for two reasons. He said, my conscience says that the government still spends too much under this bill, and he doesn't want to raise the debt ceiling. But here's the problem with, and I say this respectfully with reference to Representative Massey and Senator Paul. The bill that they would require to get their support wouldn't have passed the House and is very unlikely to pass the Senate. What's really interesting is the same gentlemen that are complaining about this bill as not being serious about cutting the budget, neither one of them has proposed their own bill. And there's a very good reason for that. They know there is no political support for those kinds of cuts, so they're not going to waste their time proposing a bill. They just want to stand on principle. And I would say that their principles are good. But the problem in practicality and the problem of our system is it requires the consent of the governed. And what I mean by that is us, as expressed through our elected representatives. And everybody is in support of cuts as long as it doesn't affect me. And then you throw the special interest groups in that lobby for all kinds of perverse incentive and pork barrel politics. And when a congressperson feels that they have to bring pork to their own districts to get reelected, no one is willing to give in, and it prevents cuts from being made. And then you get the backroom deals where they say, I won't vote for your provision if you don't vote for mine. So the reality is this bill won't even touch Social Security. That was promised by the president, and this bill doesn't touch Social Security because it's the third rail of our political system. the fear of the entitlement mentality of the American people who want Social Security benefits to continue even if the system is going to run out of money. Now, I know some people will be offended by the term entitlements because they say it's not an entitlement. I earned that money. Well, I understand that and I'm sympathetic to that line of reasoning. But the reality is, when Social Security was passed, the life expectancy of a retiree was considerably shorter, and therefore the contributions went much further. Now that we are living longer, the reality is you're likely to take much more out of the system than you put in. Therefore, it really is an entitlement. And the bigger problem, even bigger than Social Security benefits, is Medicare. Everybody wants Medicare and healthcare benefits to continue, even if it's a heavier and heavier burden on a smaller cohort of people who are still working. You need to realize that when these programs were created, there were nearly 50 workers per retiree. There were 47 or 48 workers per retiree. Today, there's slightly less than 3 workers, just over 2 workers per retiree. Here's the problem, folks. I know nobody wants to touch it, but we're living longer, so the payouts are greater. Healthcare costs a lot more than it used to, which maybe is the reason that we're living longer. We can have that debate maybe in the future. But the bottom line is the present system is not sustainable. And everybody wants someone else's benefits to be cut, but not theirs. And some people want their benefits whether they really need them or not. They say, I have sufficient retirement income, but I paid into the system, so I want to get something out. And when there's no appetite and there's no political majority that will vote for the kind of legislation that Elon Musk, Rand Paul, and Thomas Massey wants, I fear that it's the big, beautiful bill or nothing. I'm not saying we shouldn't hope that the Senate makes incremental improvements or maybe some further reductions, and then hopefully Speaker Johnson can get that revised bill through the House. But I don't think it's likely that we can get 1 trillion, much less 2 trillion, out of government spending in this bill. That's just not going to happen, even if it's a good idea. So I think that in spite of the fact that ideologically I am sympathetic with Elon Musk, I think it's probably the big, beautiful bill with some tweaks or nothing. And in a future session, when the bill is either passed, and hopefully the tax stimulation will create growth in the economy such that the growth will be allowed to be applied to deficit reduction. One can hope. But hopefully, when either the big, beautiful bill is passed and tax stimulation occurs, or if it's defeated and we continue to face the looming debt bomb and possibly future inflation, we'll look at how you can position yourself to prosper in either season. I hope you enjoyed tonight's podcast. I hope it brought some clarity to what is otherwise a very confusing topic. Remember to subscribe to Rumble and follow us. Please follow Costa Doing Business on Rumble. It will really help us. It will allow us to notify you not only of future sessions, but when we go live, it will allow us to notify you that we're going to do live for call-in purposes, and it will help us reach creator status on Rumble. So it's really important that you create that free account and follow Costa Doing Business. I'm Bob. Thanks for tuning in tonight. God richly bless you.